Yeah, with my job at camp, I get to meet a lot of students. Um, the ones I get to meet the most are the ones who get in trouble. But I was that kid too, so I think that's why I got the job. Actually, I know all the secrets and I know all the ways to try to get around things. But that wasn't really one. I say that, and I'm so proud of your pastor. He's a friend of mine. I think there's a really bright future here, not only on him but on this church, and I'm believing that. We'll proclaim that, and so thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I want to say thank you. One of the things I get to work with is Speed the Light. It's the missions arm for students in the assemblies of God. And so what we do there is we try to provide the needs for our missionaries. If they need vehicles, if they need media equipment, all of that kind of thing, it's incredible. We expedite the ability for missionaries to get where they're going to do what they need to do. And that's really super important, as you might imagine. But also we have partnerships with places where we can help them find food, find clean water, find freedom from sex trafficking. There's all kinds of things that are involved there. As a matter of fact, last year we built 19 wells, solar-powered wells in Africa that you can check and see how they're doing on your phone. It's not just a pump in the desert anymore. We're talking about providing clean water for villages, and they're always built right next to a church where they can find the living water, and that's the best of all. And so you're a part of something that's amazing, and I'm going to say thank you, and even more than that, say this last year, out of the over 180, we have 180 to 200 churches within our network in Wisconsin, Northern Michigan. And you guys were the number 15 church in giving to Speed the Light last year. So that's a lot to say, yeah. So I already bought some of those goods out there, and I tasted them. You're not going to be disappointed. So your church raised over $7,600 last year, which is a great thing for you. Thank you for doing that. And together, in the last year, we gave over $457,000 to Speed the Light. So it's a pretty cool thing that we get to be a part of. When I tell my friends that aren't familiar with what we do, they do a double take every time. They're like, students are leading the way on that kind of a thing. And it's just super exciting. Over $17 million across the country went to help those in need, because ultimately we're pointing to Jesus in all that we do in that. And so I want to say thank you. I want to brag on you. I want to make sure you know that makes a difference. Not just the dollars we give for the lives there, but even the students that are learning, hey, there's things that are more important in the world than me, taking care of what I want. And wouldn't we want that for all of... So that's my spiel on just how great you guys are and a part of this team, and hang on for dear life, because if you get around me, I'm I'm a person who's always like, what's the worst that could happen? So if I were to hang out, this is true story. When I was growing up, my best friend in high school would have been Juan met. We went to Vietnam with Bruce. My friend Bruce is like, he went with me to Vietnam, and no less than probably a dozen times called me to make sure we weren't going to end up in a jail somewhere. He's like, seriously, it's okay. And he's a worrisome guy and kind of a nervous guy. And the fact that we're best friends, people still can't figure out, because I would go into a situation and be like, what's the worst that could happen? And so sometimes we found out what the worst could happen was, but more often than not, we made it through. And so that's kind of my story. I do want to introduce a little bit of my family here, and so I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'll look behind me and show you. Okay, this is my beautiful wife, Christy, who's not able to be with me today. And next we have. Okay, so this started not this past August, but the August before. All right. So this is my oldest daughter, Kaylee, and we had their wedding in August. And next, the following July, this is Lexi, and we had her wedding in July during camp time. And then actually my next is my son. He is Gunner, and he had his wedding in September. So in literally just over a year, we had 3 amazing celebrations and weddings, and I'll tell you, we couldn't be happier with who our kids have chosen. We had Christmas together. It was an amazing time. We love them, and so we had 3 weddings in a year. I mean, what's the worst that can happen, right? So, and this is actually a crazy moment. So this is my son Gunner and his wife Elena. and this is so ironic for me, but they're like TikTok famous or Instagram famous. They had, I think, close to 20 million views of this little video they put out because they changed into sweatpants before they left their reception. So that's a whole other thing that I don't understand, but I think it's why 20 million people want to know if they're wearing sweatpants. It's just a thing these days. So, and then this is my youngest. She's Macy, and she's a senior in high school, and she's getting ready to go to North Central in the fall, and is just an amazing kid. We spent all day yesterday watching her play volleyball, and so that's our life. But as I said, she's a senior in high school. So this next year, it's going to be Christy and I and this little guy. So that's Coda. We got him last year. So I wish my wife would wait for me like that when I'm coming home from work. But if it's truth be told, that's how I'm usually waiting for her to get home from work. And so that's Coda. And so that's our family. That's what we got going on. And we have loved every stage of life with our kids and our family. But anyway, so Christy and I are at this point in life. But when we first met and started dating, we were married right out of college, and she had this unique, you guys might be familiar with the term prenups. You know what that is, kind of arrangements before you get married and that kind of thing. Well, I didn't have any money. I didn't really have anything, and so that was a real kind of an uneasy situation, and neither did she. We had loans that we could share with each other from school, so that was great. But ultimately, she did have two conditions for me before we got married. And the first was, she knew that I grew up kind of riding dirt bikes and motorcycles, and she's like, I would love it if you did not get a motorcycle. She had a friend who was an ER nurse, and that kind of ruined motorcycles for her. And then the second thing, my dad was in the 101st Airborne, and from the time I was a kid, he's like, when you turn 18, we're jumping out of a plane, kind of a deal. And my mom would be like, no, you're not. And we'd be like, yes, we are. And it went on from there, as you might imagine. So Christy picked that up, and she says, I would love it if you didn't jump out of an airplane. And I'm like, I get to spend the rest of my life with you, and those are the only two. Deal. I said, I'm in. That's a great deal, mostly because, if you know me, my main spiritual gift is to get people to do things they wouldn't want to necessarily do. So I'm like, oh, great, I got two things to focus on for the rest of my life to wear you out, that's kind of how I saw it. And so, I don't know, probably for close to, let's see, at that time it would have been probably 15, 16 years into our marriage. We're youth pastoring over in Waukesha, and they had this event in the fall, and the name of it was an outreach to bring all your friends to youth group and church, and they called it Fall on Your World, right? Kind of clever name. And I'm like, this is meant to be, right? Fall in your world? Are you serious? I'm like, we're going to shoot a video of skydiving, right in, falling on our world. And she looks at me like she's way ahead of me. She's way smarter, obviously. She knows where I'm going. I'm like, I think the kids would just love it if we had a cool video. And she's like, yep, which one of the college students are you going to get to go jump out of a plane? She's way, way ahead of me, right? I'm like, okay. So I pick out a college kid, and we're on our way, and I'm thinking, what's it hurt? One more time. I call her, and I'm like, hey, babe, we're going to jump out of a plane today and all that kind of stuff. I'm just double checking if there's any chance that, I think the students would love it if the youth pastor, and then there was that moment. Normally she'd said no by now. She didn't. So guys in the room that are married, you know what I'm talking about. When you're asking for something from your wife and she doesn't immediately say no, right? This is a crucial time. You're telling yourself, don't say anything stupid and ruin this, right? You got an opportunity. I've been waiting years and years for this. And so I'm just doing that little dance of oh, you look beautiful this morning. All the things that we do, right? And ultimately, she can't get herself to say yes. I'm like, okay, so you're okay with me jumping out of the plane? And she wouldn't say yes. And I'm like, she says these famous words. Have you ever heard these before? You can do whatever you want to do. Guys, have you heard that before? I'm not going to get you in trouble today, right? But we know what that means. And so I said, babe, is this one of those I can really do what I want to do? Or is this one of those I can do what I know I should do? Is that, because they're kind of different sometimes. She laughed and said, you can do whatever you want. So I quickly ended that conversation as quick as I could without being rude. I took my phone, I powered down my phone, put it in the glove compartment. I took Rob's phone, who was with me, and I took his phone, I powered it down and put it in the glove compartment, right? Because I know, she could have second thoughts, and then I'd get in trouble for both jumping out of a plane and not answering my phone. So it's done, right? So that day we jump out of the plane. Obviously, I survived. It was a great experience. And I tell this story a fair amount, and when I do tell the story, I always make sure to include this. A year later, that same wife whose prenup was, please don't jump out of a plane, went with me, and we both jumped out of a plane a year later. So that shows you that I can really get people to do what they never want to do. So if you want to be my friend, challenge accepted, all right? Honestly, we're talking about this kind of idea of a prenup, and I looked up a definition of it just so we'd have a context, and believe me, we're not basing it all around the idea of prenups, but it's this written contract that enables individuals to select or pick and choose and control legal rights and what happens, and get this, when their marriage eventually ends, is what it's preparing for. So what's it really about for the most part? And I'm sure there are people could debate me on this, but it's about our stuff and our money, typically, is what this is all about. And there's a person in the Bible who had more prenups than anyone. And I'm sure your guess would be Solomon, because we know how many wives he had, which was not God's plan. But it wasn't. It was actually Jacob. And I'm not going to read the stories of Jacob. You probably know many of them, but you know that this guy, from the time he was born, was a swindler and a cheat, and he was constantly making these deals. What did he do with his brother, right? His brother comes out of the woods, he's starving, and he has some stew, right? And he's going, hey, I'll give you this if you'll give me that, right? That's where it all kind of begins. He's like, what good is it going to do if I die? We know this story. And then he starts to make arrangements with his mom. He's like, we're going to fool my dad, but how are we going to do this? And they start, I'll do this if you'll do that. And there was that kind of relationship there. And we know that he faked being his brother with his dad so he could get the birthright, right? And the blessing. And on and on and on it goes. And then, ironically, he runs into his father-in-law, who's not too bad at these prenups. His father-in-law says, hey, you want to marry my daughter, Rachel? Sure, work for me for 7 years, you can have her, right? And then one of the meanest verses in the Bible talks about how ugly Leah is. That's kind of mean, but Leah ends up being his first wife and has to work another 7 years for Rachel. And he has this relationship, his relationships are all about, I'm trying to get what I want, and I'm going to get you to promise me something so I can get what I want. So it's his brother, his mom, his dad, his father-in-law. His wife gets into the picture. His wives get into the picture. When they start having kids, they're dealing, in different ways. It's just a pretty dysfunctional family and a dysfunctional way to live. And it just goes on. And so he's kind of making these arrangements to take care of himself. And I'd say it this way. Jacob's always trying to manipulate and control things, assuming something terrible is ahead. There's trouble ahead, right? I got to take care of me. And I found a couple verses in Genesis that can show you a little bit of his mindset, and maybe ours. So if you look at Genesis chapter 31, verses 6 and 7, I think I have it up on the screen. This is the frame of time where he's been with his father-in-law. He's got his wives, his daughters, Leah and Rachel, and he's talking to them about this. And so actually in verse 5, right before you get to 6 and 7, it says, he's saying, I see your father's attitude that is not friendly toward me as formerly, but God, the God of my father, has been with me. And then verse 6, it says this. In other words, he's saying, hey, your dad's not being too nice to me. And in verse 6, it says, you know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father's cheated me, right? What's going on here? Basically, you can see he's setting the table to do what he wants to do, right? Isn't that what we do? We're like, if I'm going to do something that comes off as selfish, I'm going to lay out this way that, your dad's been kind of mean to me and unfair to me, and so we got to do this, right? And guess what? His wives follow suit just a few verses later in 14 and 16. You can see it's up here. In these verses, it's basically saying, oh, yeah, what about all dad's stuff and our inheritance? And like there's this mindset of I've got to take care of myself. What I need to get those things. And what do? We get around other people and we start to make arguments that are going to support that kind of thing. And that's what's going on. It's a way of life for him. And honestly, Rachel takes it to the next level where she steals you guys know this part of the story, she steals her dad's idols. And there's a lot of reasons why she might do that, but I don't know if you know this. The person in possession of those idols would be entitled to the land. That was a way for her to guarantee, that was her proof or whatever, that would be her land. So what she was really doing was making sure that when they left and went on this adventure, that they would always have something to fall back on. Took those idols saying, hey, this will prove that I get the inheritance and I can come back if things don't work out and we'll have all of this stuff here. It's kind of an interesting thing. Rachel later leverages relationship, even to the point of things as silly as saying, hey, Leah, if you give me those mandrakes, which mandrakes were supposed to have some fertility abilities, and she wanted to have a child so bad that she was like, you can be with our husband if I can have those types of things. You see what I'm setting the table here is this: if our relationships are in such a way where I'm always trying to manipulate and control and leverage, it's kind of this prenup going, how do I make sure I get what I want and I'm taken care of when things go bad? When this thing doesn't work out, when it's over, when we don't make it on our journey, I can always come back and have dad's property. When we don't make it, I always have the blessing. I always have the inheritance. And this is the way that Jacob lived his life. It makes me think of, just this controlling it actually points to something that I think we could maybe relate to. It's a lack of faith. It's an assumption that God won't take care of me. I better take care of myself. Can you relate to that? I don't know. Maybe I'm the only person in here, but I know that there are plenty of times when I get an opportunity to give and I feel like I might do something. There's this, I'm a math, you guys might not know, but I was a math major for 3 years in college, and then God rescued me. But he didn't rescue my mind. It still works. And so numbers go through my head. I'm like, and there's a lot in that number going through our head moment where we express our faith versus our fear, right? I want to take care of things. I got to be good. And we'll use, now, we beat up on Jacob a little bit, so let's take a few shots ourselves. And we do have to be wise with our money, and we have to be good stewards, but let's not use those things to excuse our fear and manipulation, our prenuptial agreement when it comes to our finances and our resources with the Lord, right? When I preach, trust me, I see me. I know I'm this way. You might be the rare exception that none of you have this issue and none of you have that kind of challenge, but I know that I do. And so in looking at this life, I don't want to get in a place where I'm going to assume that God will let me down. I believe the opposite. And every time I've taken care of myself, he has let me. So there's fair warning. He will let you do it your way. He's let me do it my way. And his resources are greater than mine. So I want to look at two stories in the New Testament with Jesus, because I think that part of what we're talking about is this struggle that Jacob has and his way of thinking. And then so I thought, well, what about people that were around Jesus, like literally around Jesus? And there's two stories that I go to often. One's found in Luke chapter 18. It's a very familiar story. This is an incredible man, top of his class. He's like just well respected, and we don't know his name, I think partly because of how the story goes, but he was referred to as the rich young ruler. So he had resources, he had respect, he had his act together. And he comes to Jesus in verse 18, and he basically says this is, what do I need to do? Okay, listen to the words he uses. What do I need to do to get eternal life from you? Prenuptial agreement, right? What are the terms of our agreement for this relationship? For me to get what I want, What do I need? And Jesus gives the typical answer. He's like, hey, here's the things you do. Keep the commands. And he's like, yeah, I've done all that. And as only Jesus can, he puts his finger on the real issue. I hope that we've all been at the point. If you haven't, I encourage you to get to the point where you pray and you have conversations with the Lord where he gets past all of that other stuff and gets down to the real issue. And he said, it's a hard issue. He says, sell all you have, give it to the poor, and follow me. If you really want what you said you wanted, here's what you need to do. And what is he famous for? He's famous for turning and walking away sadly, right? That's what he's famous for. You know what he got to? It would have been like me listening to Christy say, no motorcycles, no skydiving, and me going, I guess it's not going to work out. Now, I did not love skydiving, and I did love motorcycles enough to give up on that. But the rich young ruler, he loved some things enough that he was willing to give up on that, right? And he did. He walked away sadly. Let's flip it over. Very next chapter, in chapter 19, we come into a famous, this guy we know his name, it's Zacchaeus, and he's famous for what? Isn't it crazy? Like that, the first thing you hear about him is like, oh, that's the short guy. You know, I mean, it's kind of funny how the Bible is, but it's true, right? And so he had to get up in a tree to see Jesus. And most of you, if you grew up in the church, you're humming the song or thinking the song in your head or already have. But he's the opposite. He's the last in his class. He's the guy who was stealing from people and cheating people and just had no friends, right? But he had a ton of money. He was a thief and a liar. And then Jesus invites himself over to his house. And this is what I want you to see. The person who should have known all about the kingdom, who did all the right things, made all the right decisions, went and asked the question directly to Jesus, what do I need to do? And couldn't do it. You don't see any interaction between Zacchaeus and Jesus where he tells him what he has to do. He doesn't do it. Zacchaeus is around Jesus and he knows. What does he do? He's like, I need to get half of what I have belongs to the poor. And anybody who I've ever mistreated, I'm going to give them 4 times what I ever took from them. Jesus didn't say that. There was an understanding when he was in the presence of Jesus that he's like, listen, the things that used to matter, they don't matter. I don't need a prenup with. I can't believe he chose me. And in the response that's so great is Jesus, he sees and hears that statement from this man, Zacchaeus, and he can't contain himself. He's like, salvation has come to this house. He's like, this guy gets it, right? And it wasn't the guy who was at church every week and gave in the offering and did all the right thing. It was the guy who was a cheater and a liar, and he saw this lifeline with Jesus, and he's like, I would take that deal 10 out of 10 times. Rich young ruler said, I can't make that deal. It's an interesting, it's a new priority. It's a new thing. It's a new perspective. And all of a sudden, the things that used to matter don't matter. Something great happened there. Jesus saw who Zacchaeus could be. That's why he called him out of the tree. He's like, and you know what? He sees you, not as you are, but as who you can be. In Jacob's case, he's wrestling with the Lord. There's this famous thing where he's wrestling, right? And finally, it doesn't happen until he owns up to the fact that he was exactly what his name meant. He was a deceiver. He would look out for himself. And in that moment, what does God do? If you don't know, this is the moment where Jacob had a name change. Now that you realize this, God said, we can do something with this. And he says, your name's no longer Jacob. You're no longer that person. I have envisioned somebody completely different. I had envisioned a life completely different for you. Your new name is Israel. How cool is that, right? Wouldn't it be great if we came and we got in that moment where God saw who we could be, and we heard that and we felt that, and all of a sudden he's like, listen, all the things that you think you've been, all the mistakes that you've made, that's not who really I see. There's somebody different that's trying to emerge from you and to be you, and I can see it. Wouldn't it be great if we step forward and go, yeah, What a sad story if Jacob, now Israel, would have said, it's just too much for me. I gotta maintain control. If I don't do this, who's going to do this for me, right? He made the right decision. How many times do we go, Lord, I trusted you that one time. It was great. It worked out. But then we run back and we go, I got it from here, right? Kind of this thing that happens here. And so I look at this and I just think God sees, I want you to hear this. God sees who we can be, who you can be, and he renames us. And that's how we become followers. And I got a verse that we're going to look at in a little bit that I think clears this up. But I do have a couple of questions for you today. I want to ask you, what are your prenups? What are the conditions you've put on your relationships? Friends, family? Certainly we're talking about what are the conditions I put on with my relationship with God. We can go for the obscure and the silly, like when you're young and you're like, Lord, if you get me out of this jam, right? I'll serve. Nobody else has had that moment in here. Come on. We've all many times been like, I'll do better, and we make all these promises. And what I want you to hear today for sure is that the conditions that are involved in our relationship with the Lord are discipleship and follower conditions. They're not access conditions. When it came to salvation, he willingly did that. He said, I'm going to go to that cross for you, for me, and there's nothing else. That's it. It's available for you. Now, once we accept him and we receive that free gift, there are conditions that become apparent because I'm like, just like with my wife, there were things that I don't know that you'd say I have to do this or don't have to do this. I choose that all the way through relationship, right? But Jesus came and he went to that cross for us. But I think about it, what are the conditions? Lord, if you bless this, we're going to give X. Right? Anybody ever? Don't raise your hands. I'll just pretend they're all up out there because I know I've done it enough for all of us. Lord, if you're in this, I'm going to do this with that. When in reality, I think it might be better if I'm like, Lord, no matter what happens here, all that I have is yours. You've given me what, and man, wouldn't it be crazy just to fail miserably and be like, you know why we failed? We just had too much faith. We just had too much faith that God would take care of this. I don't hear a lot of those stories. So interesting. What are our prenups? What are the conditions we put? When I think of the story of Rachel and how she took those idols, I maybe ask these questions. What are you unwilling to leave behind? What are the things that you're hanging on to? What are the things that you just can't live without, right? I mean, I think we all, if you have a testimony, it's what we've been rescued from usually, right? The things we loved so much that we had to have all of a sudden became the thing that kept us kind of from him or pulled away. And so I hope those are running through your head this morning as I'm talking. What's the thing that Jesus has identified in your life that could cause you to walk away sadly? I hope there's nothing that would ever make you walk away. And I think that we are in a place where we're saying, I would never do that. And I believe that. But I know there are things in my life that if they're taken, there are some things that I wrestle with. And there are some things that you wrestle with. And it'd be important to know and to understand that. And I think the rich young ruler, the reason it's sad he doesn't even get a name. But his adjectives kind of stink, right? He's rich and he's young. And he's a leader. And those are things that he strived for, he achieved, and ultimately he loved more than Jesus. And so this morning I'm just pushing you going, man, if you feel guilt for me, like, no, that's not, I have a bunch of friends that can tell you that I don't operate in that gift. I survived that through my young years in the church. We majored in that back in my day. Like, I think there's a little bit of the guilt would have been fine, but I just, we majored in it for a while. So, but I'm just saying this is preventative. If there's something that's going to take you and make you to walk away sadly, get your eyes on that and challenge that and work with that. So will you acknowledge your reality so that Jesus can rename you? in your times with him, will you really say, listen, I know I've been a deceiver, I've been selfish, I've been whatever it might be, right? So that Jesus can come in and go, but there's good news. The Spirit of God is alive inside of you, and those things can go away. They can be gone. They really can be. You don't have to be a victim to those weaknesses or those challenges or those desires. There's a way out of that. Jesus wants to rename us. Because here's what I think. I think we're in a wrestling match with the Lord every day, trying to shed who we were to become who he sees that we can be. I think this church is in a wrestling match. You're in a time of transition. It's exciting, trying to figure out who you're going to be. And I think it's important to say, Lord, I don't want anything to make us walk away as a church. I don't want anything to make us walk away as individuals. And I think that there's a couple things that I have. You think, well, why do I talk about this and talk about Speed the Light and missions? Because I think it's one of the best ways. It's a great measuring stick, right, is to just see what my view on all this is. Just give it away. Give it away. Give your time away. Give your resources. Give your leadership. Give your money. Just give that stuff away and let God be your source. I've said it earlier. God will let you take care of yourself if you want to, and sometimes you might even be fairly good at it. But if you could just see the picture of what it looks like when you and I do that versus what it looks like when he does that, it might not look how you'd think, but I guarantee you one of them is much more desirable than the other, and it doesn't leave a long list of people that we've manipulated or controlled or been in prenuptial agreements with to get what we want. Do you want friends like that? I'll be your friend if. That's not, I don't think, where we're at. So, man, I just know there's so much brokenness around us that for us to be in that place is the only way we're going to help those that are around us find the thing that they're looking for. You can't make this stuff up. I'm sleeping in a hotel this morning, and all of a sudden I hear this commotion in the hallway, and it's reality TV times 1,000. And words like baby mama and this kind of stuff are flying around, and it is just this horrendous picture of the brokenness of our world, where this lady is saying he kicked her out of the room, she doesn't have anything, she doesn't even have shoes on her feet. And this is the relationship that she's in, and she's your neighbor, she's my neighbor, and that's the reality of a broken world, of a relationship that probably had conditions in it, right? It will always lead to brokenness. All the story, you don't ever hear like Jacob's story without God intervening and going, oh yeah, no, it worked out. Even God had to come in and change him. God's going to have to come in and change me and you for us to have a chance with those that are around us to help heal the brokenness. And I think that's our job. So I'm going to finish up with Luke chapter 9. This verse is famous, 23 to 25. And it's Jesus' words where he says, if anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life shall lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake, he is the one who will save it. For what is it a man profited if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? I think when it comes down to it, why I love missions, why I love Speed the Light, is that there's a real easy test. Do we believe in it? Yeah, no. In my world, it's like there are girls that are being trafficked right now. And for $30,000, we can build them a place and pay for their bills and feed them and educate them for a year. If we want to feed 1 million people that are starving, we give $100,000 and they have food. Okay? If we want to take care of clean water, it's like $20 for a family to have clean water for the rest of their life. There are numbers tied to it. As a self-professed former math guy, if I know that's what it takes to make that kind of change, I'm in on that. And I'm like, I don't want to run down the road of, let me say this last thing. Part of my job, my personal job, is to make sure I can stand before you and say, listen, these organizations that we give to and we work with, do what they say. Because, right, isn't one of the things that we hide, there's stories all the time about this guy who raised millions of dollars, and you find out that, they gave $7,000 once back whenever to this. I've been to these places, I've seen it, I know them, and it is changing people's environment so they can hear about the gospel, right? It's hard to hear when you don't have clean water. You can't, I've seen they're walking all day long and getting water out of something that without a life straw, you wouldn't even consider drinking, and it's what they're doing every day, okay? So the challenge this morning is this, is pretty simple to me, is will I tell the truth about myself? Will I come into a place where, God, there's no prenuptial agreement? Whatever you ask of me, I'm giving you all that I have. As a church, are you in that place? It's my prayer that you won't see the limitations, whether it's financially or location or COVID or anything else, but you'll see, Lord, you've renamed us. You see something that we don't even see, and that's my prayer for you today. So I'd ask that you would just bow your heads and pray with me, and let's believe for a miracle that's going to happen starting with you and with me, and that it will be something that this church will be known for. God, I ask that you would just speak to our hearts through these stories, that we wouldn't look down on people like Jacob or a rich young ruler or even Zacchaeus, that we would relate to them and say, God, help us get to the place where we've wrestled with you and you can rename us as a follower, as a believer, as somebody who's one of your disciples. God, free us from the things that we're hanging on to. May our reliance be on you. And as we get opportunities to give, we would race forward with our time. We would race forward with our resources. We would be at the front of the line trying to help those in need and start to heal the brokenness that's all around us. Thank you so much for your love for us. I thank you that you have provided a way and a model. And ultimately, God, we want to live out this Luke chapter 9 where, man, we'll give it all for you. And it's our prayer. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.